Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations at the Manipal Academy of Higher Education, it's my pleasure to welcome you all for today's webinar on the theme Indian-China Ties, Perceptions and Policies. We are joined by an esteemed panel of China experts comprising of Ambassador Gautam Bambawale, Professor Srikanth Kondapalli, and Lt. General S.L. Narasimhan. On that note, I would now like to invite Dr. Kishore, head of the department, to deliver the introductory remarks.
Thank you, Amrita. At the outset, let me take this opportunity to welcome three distinguished panelists for the day: Ambassador Gautam Bambawale, Professor Srikanth Kondapalli, and Lieutenant General Narasimhan. It's a great pleasure to have you people on a very pertinent theme that's of great interest to students of geopolitics and international relations, and more so, the complex nature of the problem itself requires more and more deliberations. I think it should become part of the global common where we discuss it more, so that more and more deliberation leads to better understanding of the nature of the problems that are existing between these two nations. I think the perceptions are the basis on which the policies are framed. I think it's a logical way to look at the perceptions and followed by the policies, because if perceptions have direct link to the policies, how policies can be formulated. If policies have to be, then I think both sides have to have some sort of understanding, and more so, India being on the receiving end needs to be much more careful and needs to make every move in a way that it goes well with its own domestic as well as external environment. I don't think there could have been a better panel to discuss this particular issue. We have known all the three of them being eminent scholars. Professor Gautam though is known to be the one who can speak black and white. Professor Srikanth, whom we have admired and have heard him for a long time, and Lieutenant General Narasimhan brings in the value of being a practitioner as well as someone who's an insider, to be precise, and some of our students have worked with him. We have had the pleasure of interacting with him during the Manipal dialogue, where we had the Chinese counterparts as well, along with this Ambassador Gautam Bambawale. So I don't need to speak about my department, and it's all because of people like you. We have grown to what we are, and we see your esteemed presence, support, and encouragement as the pillar of strength to the department itself. We would want all of you to come physically when things get better, and then deliberate, interact with the students, because everything and anything can be brought in the world, but not experience. That's what makes you people special. That's what makes you people scholarly. And we look forward to having you people. And for today, I'm extremely thankful, and I express my gratitude to all three of you for having agreed to be part of this one. And my special thanks to my colleague, Dr. Amrita, for taking up this opportunity. She joined us just a month ago, but she wanted to do certain things. And this is our first program or first event that she's organizing after joining as a faculty in the department. So that itself also makes it special, and also it will go a long way in the activities that the department is doing. With all of your cooperation, I'm sure we will be able to do better, and the students will benefit greatly from all of your experience. Thank you once again, and I welcome you to this webinar. Amrita.
Thank you very much, sir, for setting the precedent and taking it further from Dr. Kishore, as we know that the India-China border is on high alert and the red flags look large and heavy on the tides. So in this context, today's deliberations are not just timely but significant. More specifically, in the context of China and Bhutan signing the MOU and taking it further to the PRC's first ever border law that sends a clear message stating, as I quote, the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the People's Republic of China are sacred and inviolable, and that the PLA shall resolutely prevent, stop, and combat invasion, encroachment, provocation, and other acts. In this context, I would like to invite our speakers to provide their perspectives And on that basis, the webinar for today would be deliberated from three key perspectives. Firstly, the way China views India as a rising power at the global stage and how that impacts India-China ties. Secondly, China's views on India as a regional power and how it impacts India-China ties. And finally, on the way China perceives the boundary dispute based on episodes of conflict from 1962 to Doklam to that of the Eastern Ladakh crisis and how that brings in or changes the dynamics in India-China relations. And to deliberate on it, we have an esteemed panel, and our first speaker for today is Ambassador Gautam Bambawale, who served as a former Indian ambassador to China, Pakistan, and Bhutan, followed by our second speaker for today, Professor Srikanth Kondapalli, who is Professor of China Studies at the Center for East Asian Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, and finally, our final speaker for today is Lieutenant General Narasimhan, who served as Defense Attaché to China and is currently the Director General for Center for Contemporary Chinese Studies, Ministry of External Affairs. I extend a warm welcome to all the speakers and all our participants for today. And now I would like to invite Ambassador Gautam Bambawale to take the stage. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so very much, Professor Nandkishore, Professor Amrita Jayesh, both from the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations at the Manipal Academy of Higher Education, all the students who are present there, and of course my esteemed co-panelists whom I have known for many, many years, maybe even decades, General Narasimhan and Professor Kondapalli. It's a great pleasure to be with all of you this morning. And I think that the topic that has been chosen by Dr. Amrita Jayesh is very, very interesting because very often, you know, all three of us, and I'm sure many of you who are even students at Manipal, are faced by questions from ordinary people. And those questions normally are, why is China doing this? Why is China doing that? What are they signaling to us? What is the implication of this? And most recently, as you know, the Chinese have promulgated a new land borders law or a land boundary law, if you want to call it that way. And the same series of questions were asked, I'm sure, from all of us. That what the hell is the significance of this new land borders law? Why have they done it at this time? What is the meaning of it? What is the implications for India-China relations? So I think that the topic of India in China's eyes, perceptions and policies, is a very good topic which has been chosen by Professor Amrita Jayesh, and I am delighted to be with all of you on this particular subject. Let me start at a more philosophical level. The fact is that the Chinese accept and understand that both India and China are ancient civilizations. This is something that they cannot negate, even if they want to. Not that I'm saying that they want to, but this is something they cannot negate because Indian civilization is as old as Chinese civilizations, and the Chinese do accept that both India and China are ancient civilizations, along with a few other civilizations in the world. Now, the basic philosophies of our two civilizations are diametrically opposite. And this is my starting point. This is where I'm going to kick off my presentation or my remarks to all of you today. And these philosophical underpinnings of our two ancient civilizations are so deep that they also impact on our foreign policies. And that is the relevance of it for us today. Now, what are these diametrically opposite philosophical underpinnings of our foreign policies? As all of you know, India is a country which likes to live with others. We talk about Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, The world is one family. And we don't just talk about it. We don't just give lip service to it. We actually believe in it. And there are many manifestations of this belief of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, that the world is one family, that if we are to grow and progress, we have to do it together. And the most recent example that I would like to present to all of you and put before you is that of vaccine Maitri. Many other countries never thought of vaccine Maitri. Many other countries thought only of themselves and not of anyone else. It was only later, after India started its vaccine Maitri program, that others got onto this bandwagon, especially when they realized that they had enough vaccines of their own. In the reverse, India had to pull back from its vaccine Maitri program because it realized it didn't have enough vaccines for its own people. And for a short period, we had to stop the export of vaccines. But we, as you all know, we have resumed this from October of this year. So here is just one example of India not just giving lip service, but believing in Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The philosophical underpinnings of the Chinese civilization are diametrically opposite. They believe in Chungwo. As all of you know, that it is China which is the center of the world. It is China which is the center of the universe. It is China which is the most important country in the world. The rest of them, in many cases, do not matter, or if they do matter, they will soon not matter. This is the philosophical underpinning of China's approach, not just to life, but also to foreign policy. And you can see how diametrically opposite this is, because the Chinese are completely self-absorbed. The Chinese are completely self-centered. The Chinese only think about themselves. And if then they have any time left over, and if it is in their interest, they'll think of other peoples, of other countries, of the rest of the world. So the very philosophical basis or underlying philosophies of our two civilizations are diametrically opposite. And I think this is something which we in India have not taken on board. We have not understood. Perhaps people like us who study China have not underlined it to ordinary people and stressed it to ordinary people as much as we should. Because even today, the questions which come, when you look at it from this philosophical basis of our civilizations, immediately a lot of things fall into place and you begin to understand why China is doing action A or why China is doing action B. So I start with this particular thesis that our philosophical underpinnings of our civilizations are such that it is very important to understand the Chinese philosophy in order to understand Chinese perceptions and policies. Now, I'd like to give you an example of this and where and how we went wrong in the early years of independent India and the early years of the People's Republic of China. When the Asian Relations Conference was thought about and we were planning to have the Asian Relations Conference, the pre-conference or the first step was held in India, then later in Indonesia, etc. We all know that and you all know that. But our then Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru always felt that a newly independent India and the People's Republic of China, which had shaken off the yoke of some vestiges of imperialism, these two countries were absolutely important for the resurgence of Asia. Japan was already there, and Japan was an industrially powerful country. She had gone through the Industrial Revolution, but it was Japan, of course, which had also colonized parts of China. But Jawaharlal Nehru felt that it was India and China and the resurgence, the reappearance on the international stage of our two countries, which was going to lead to the resurgence of Asia. Now, this sort of belief, this sort of approach stemmed from this very philosophical underpinnings of our culture and of our foreign policy, that the world is one family. You look at others and you give them their due. You look at yourself, you also give yourself your due, but you are not completely self-absorbed and totally looking only at yourself in this whole approach. Whereas the Chinese were doing exactly that. And when the Asian Relations Conference was held, the Chinese premier, then Premier Chou En-lai, was only thinking about China. He didn't want India anywhere on the world stage and the world map. And consistently over the last 70 odd years, China has pursued that basic fundamental policy where India is concerned and which stems from its perceptions, which stems from its philosophical undertakings and underpinnings, and which translate into policy not only for a short period, but over a long stretch of 75 odd years. So, ladies and gentlemen and students, this is my basic basic thesis, which I would like to propose and talk to you about. This mistake has been repeated not only by governments of India, but repeatedly we have made this mistake of bringing in China, of talking about China as a resurgent power, and then saying that China and India will, make a difference to global politics, will make a difference to the international situation, etc., etc. Even recently, and I'm afraid I didn't do the research for this, but there was a joint statement between India and China during one of the high-level visits. I think it took place in the last 10 or 15 years, but the statement made in that joint statement was that India-China relations have transcended their bilateral nature and have become international in nature. Now, once again, this is a fundamental, there's a fundamental mistake which India is making, because China doesn't look at it this way. China is not looking at the resurgence of India and China and Southeast Asia and other countries in the world. China is looking at its own resurgence, and China, which has grown by almost 10% per annum over a period of 4 decades, is today indeed the second largest economy in the world, and therefore China has a very important role to play on the international stage. She does not think of India or any other country when she looks at it in this way. So I believe that this is a fundamental mistake that we have made in reading China's perceptions of India. And in fact, the reactions to it is that we should also not bring in the China factor at all. Why the hell should we? We should speak only of India. India has done a good job in economic development. We have not grown as fast as China. Definitely, we're not as big as China. We're only 1/5 of China's GDP. But we should focus on ourselves and not give China this kind of unnecessary due that we have been repeatedly doing over the past 70 odd years. So that is point number 2. My third point about China's perceptions of India is that we in India believe, and I started with this, that both India and China are ancient civilizations, which we are. There is no doubt about that. But the Chinese Communist Party has played up the last 150 years of China's history. It is not talking about Buddhism. It is not talking about 5,000 years of history. It is talking about the last 100 to 150 years, what they call the century of shame, the century of humiliation. And it has weaponized that century of shame, century of humiliation to drum up nationalism within China and to achieve its own objectives. And when you look at this, then you realize that if you look at only the last 150 years of China's history since, say, the Opium Wars of the 1840s, then the Chinese perception of India is not that Buddhism came from India to China. It is not that India is also an ancient civilization like China. It is that it was Indian soldiers, that it was Indian troops who participated in the British Indian armies, which carried out the colonialism, which carried out the Opium Wars. It was India from where the opium came. It was Indian soldiers who carried out the wars and which led to the ceding of Hong Kong and so on and so forth. So if this is the part of history which the Chinese Communist Party highlights, then the implications are that the perceptions of the party, the perceptions of the people of China are restricted to this period of 150 odd years. And then the perception of India is very, very negative. And therefore, even during the period of Nehru, Mao, Zhou Enlai, very often Chinese papers, Chinese journals used to call Nehru the running dog of capitalism, the running dog of imperialism, because it stems from this perception of India, which is restricted to the last 150 years of our of history. So that is point number 2 that I would like to make to all of you today. A third point that I'd like to make is post-independence. There is a reluctant acceptance on part of China that India has also, to a certain extent, succeeded in economic development. And what hits them the hardest is the fact that India today is considered a software power. That India is a power in the software side of things, whereas China is more the factory of the world and is a power where the hardware side of things is concerned. And very often, Chinese people will ask you, as they have asked all of us on the panel, that how the hell have you guys succeeded at software when you can't do anything on hardware? And of course, the answer that I used to give to my Chinese friends, and most of them were outside the government, is that, look, you have the Chinese Communist Party and you have this system in China where you are not allowed to think freely. You are not to think about democracy. You're not to think freely. You cannot think out of the box. In India, we can think freely. We can think out of the box. And that is something which is essential for doing good software, whether in the computer field, whether in other fields, etc., etc. So, this is something which they reluctantly do accept. But of course, they are trying to catch up, and we all know that they are doing quite well in software. And I don't mean software purely as a computer software kind of thing, but I also mean software in terms of interaction with people, winning friends, influencing people. One of the things that Chinese people always, it khatkaus in their mind is that all Western countries are willing to send their satellites on Indian space launch vehicles. No Western country will send their satellite on a Chinese space launch vehicle. And very often they ask the question why. And the answer to that is very simple, because if you hand over your satellite to the Chinese, they're going to reverse engineer it and take away all the IPR that you have on that satellite. So this is something which also khatkaus with them. And let me spend the last 5 minutes that I have with all of you, because Professor Jayesh has given us 20 minutes each. I don't want to bore you, but spend the last 5 minutes on why Eastern Ladakh has taken place, why Eastern Ladakh is continuing to take place, what are the underpinnings of it, and so on and so forth. So I think that comes to the perception that China and Chinese leaders hold of India today. And that is that even while we may be doing reasonably well where economic development, growth, lifting the living standards of our people are concerned, China has done it much better. And today China has not just a GDP which is 5 times that of India, but China's comprehensive national power, China's comprehensive national strength, which includes things like education, science and technology, innovation, etc., etc., is many times that of ours. And this differential, this asymmetry between India and China was a necessary factor for China to have decided to do what she did from April 2020 or May 2020 in Eastern Ladakh, where she moved her troops, violated all the bilateral agreements that existed between India and China, in order to maintain peace and tranquility, because the first paragraph or the first article in all those agreements say that you cannot, neither India nor China can move large-scale troops with equipment to the border without notifying the other side. And obviously the Chinese didn't notify it, and therefore, in my opinion, they have violated each and every one of the bilateral agreements which was aimed at ensuring peace and tranquility in our border areas. Now, the implications of it go far beyond just bilateral relations. China realizes that if it wants to take on the United States as the hegemon, at least in Asia, if not in the world, then it has to get its backyard in order. It has to get Asian nations to accept China's hegemony. And the most important Asian nations, apart from ASEAN, of course, which I believe, in my opinion, have already accepted Chinese hegemony. And I'm willing to debate this with any Southeast Asian who wants to debate it with me. But the main countries that will have to fall in line are Japan, India, and Australia. And therefore, you find that China is being aggressive with all these countries. It's being aggressive with Australia on an economic front. It has attempted economic coercion. The reaction from Australia is there for all of you to see in terms of AUKUS, in terms of the Quad. It has attempted military coercion on India's borders to get us to fall in line, which has also fallen flat because it has only made India a stronger proponent of the Quad, a stronger proponent of partnership with Australia, Japan, the United States, UK, France, etc., etc. And of course, it has attempted coercion against Japan also in the Senkaku Islands. And of course, you can see what it's doing vis-a-vis Taiwan, which is of course the most important of all subjects for the Chinese for Beijing. So this is the perception that China holds today, that it is the preeminent power in Asia. Other countries, other powers, other nation states must recognize this and fall in line. And it is only when China is accepted and really becomes the hegemon in Asia that she can then turn towards the current global hegemon, which is the United States, and then take it on at a global level. So this is what is playing out in front of us. I believe that the reactions from India, both militarily and diplomatically and politically, have caught the Chinese by surprise. But we need to continue to surprise them and push them on the back foot if we have to disabuse them about their idea that China is the hegemon in Asia. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop there. I've thrown a number of things, including some interesting ideas to all of you. I'll leave it to the other speakers to make their points, and I hope that we can have a very interesting conversation between all of us at the end of the session. So thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, sir, for that insightful perspective. Now I would like to invite Mr. Srikanth Kondapalli to take on the stage. Over to you, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can.
Yes, good morning. Let me apologize for the breakup in the beginning. There was some internet issue. A very good morning to you all. And let me thank the organizers for inviting me for this interaction. Can you see me? Is my video on? No, at least the voice is there. So let me begin this session. The topic is India in China's eyes. So perspectives and policies. So perceptions and policies. Now, perceptions keep changing. So one of the things as researchers, we need to keep this in mind. Perceptions keep changing based on the ground realities changing. And Ambassador Bambawale eloquently mentioned about those changes that have been in the Chinese foreign policy towards India, or China's policies towards India. So so there is a connection, a causal connection between the ground reality and perceptions as well. So the policies also keep changing based on these considerations. So with this brief caveat, let me go into the presentation. So when we say perceptions again, who are the stakeholders in China? Of course, a long list of those stakeholders. At one time, the Gang of Four was the stakeholder in 1970s during the Cultural Revolution, or even some other actors before. So when we see the Chinese decision making, we find a few stakeholders. Number one is the Communist Party itself. So we need to start the analysis from that point of view, because Communist Party is supreme in China. They control all levers of power, all levers of decision making, all policy making as well. So Communist Party is at the center here, and various inputs that the Communist Party receives. Number one, in terms of the Foreign Affairs Bureau of the Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party. That's where much of the inputs are gathered, and these are put up for the small leading group on foreign affairs. The small leading group of the foreign affairs is headed by the Politburo Standing Committee members. In this case, currently Xi Jinping, and also other members like, incidentally, they also have the military component. The General Staff Department representatives and others are also part of this small leading group. But to be fair to China, we also have the China Study Group, in which the Vice Chief of Army Staff is also a member of that China Study Group. So we also have the military component in the decision making in the foreign policy related to China. So the small leading group, since 2018, this has been reorganized, reformed. There is a new foreign affairs committee that has come in. Of course, many of the functions remain the same, except that today Xi Jinping is also the continuing decisive element. So small leading group here is important as the most decisive. So we do not know exactly what the small leading group has said about India. But what Ambassador Bambawale had mentioned, there are those some of those issues which are still continuing in their literature, in their positions. Broadly, what do the Communist Party think? Since we don't have the Politburo Standing Committee small leading groups views on India, we somehow get these into the public domain in the publications. So in general, they say, the Communist Party or the publications say, India is an important country in South Asia. So this is one formulation that comes up. In all textbooks in China, this is the common phrase that is used. India is an important country in South Asia. What is important here is the word in here. So this is a Cold War perspective, which the Americans have also proposed. Since the 1954 United States Defense Education Act, they have divided Asia into these regions, and South Asia is one component of that. So the Chinese perspective is a Cold War perspective. Although during Hu Jintao's visit to New Delhi in November 2006, they mentioned that India and China will work together in Asia, broader Asia, not South Asia, but Asia. However, we have not seen much working together in Asia, except that we have had some strategic dialogues or dialogues on Afghanistan, on Southeast Asia, on Central Asia, or on other areas. So broadly, let us say that the Cold War perspective still continues within the Communist Party or broadly China in their view on India as an important country in South Asia. And none of the researchers in MAHE say that China is an important country in East Asia. we have not seen any of your thesis or dissertation saying that China is an important country in East Asia, but we keep mentioning about also India is an important country in South Asia. So willy-nilly we follow the Cold War logic here. And of course, it makes no sense to say a $15 trillion economy as confined to East Asia, nor can we say a $3 trillion economy confined to South Asia, because it is interacting with other regions of Asia. So this is a problematic in terms of the construction of such a view. But nevertheless, if you look at the latest textbooks in China, this is the phrase that is used, that India is an important country in South Asia. So that continues. So overall is a Cold War perspective or a perception that they have from the broader point of view. So that is one I would like to say. Second is the Communist Party discussions have led to, we have seen, for instance, the Panchsheel principle in '54. Although not all joint statements mention about the Panchsheel principles. In the recent joint statements, we have not heard about the Panchsheel principles outlined in the joint statements with India. But China keeps mentioning this whenever they have some trouble with the major powers or other powers. So they keep mentioning this. Second, we also saw the Bandung Conference and the other slogans like Hindi Chini Bye Bye, or recently multipolarity or multilateral institutions. Just recently we had the BRICS meeting, and some of these slogans have been raised on multipolarity and multilateralism. In SCO as well, Shanghai Cooperation Organization as well. Some of these, although last 2 years after Galwan, Indian voice has become much more realistic in nature than compared with the previous period. So we can see the difference in the tone in these joint statements. But the tools of multipolarity and multilateralism are also important tools for us to analyze Chinese perceptions towards India. And here there is a lot that is happening both in the United Nations or in East Asian Summit, SCO, BRICS, or other initiatives. So that is one feature that we come across in the Communist Party in terms of their views on India. The next is the obviously the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which is also a component in the small leading group, but this is one which has to do the jadu pocha on the foreign policy. So they obviously will be having a say in this. So when we look at some of the major developments in India's foreign policy, for example, the 123 agreement or others, the US-India relations improving, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs language becomes much more realistic from the IR realism point of view. So we see the balancing or containment perceptions visible in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs language increasingly. So this is one perception that we come across in the Foreign Ministry, although they are part of the engagement. So whenever the situation arises, they do raise that issue. But balancing in the IR realism perspective of balance of power, we come across the Ministry of Foreign Affairs perceptions, and also the policies as part of that balancing. So here, obviously, Pakistan, or recently the Wang Yi, the foreign minister, had proposed the Himalayan Quad, and 4 meetings took place. So we see this balancing here, either on Afghanistan issue, Pakistan issue, or the Belt and Road Initiative projects with Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bangladesh, or others. So here the tone of balancing is reflected heavily. Then there is the other stakeholder, the third stakeholder, the PLA. PLA publishes annual yearbooks every year, and most countries, nearly 200 countries' perceptions are factored here. And let me recommend the MAHE to acquire some of these, at least digital collections. The PLA here looks at India, and their position is broadly summarized in three bullet points. The first position the PLA takes on India is a hegemon in South Asia. That is the perception. So as a hegemon, then the policy option they suggest is to help Pakistan, to help Bangladesh, or to help Nepal. In their joint statements, for instance, they say, we respect Pakistan's independence. We respect the self-determination of so and so and so. So the language used here is to counter the so-called hegemony of India in South Asia. So the policy here is quite reflective of that. The second position the PLA takes is India has global ambitions by Look East policy, Act East policy, or the Quad or Indo-Pacific or other initiatives that it has. So one of the policy options then is, how do you confine India to South Asia box? So that is a policy option. So they view from various angles how they can constrict the Indian global footprint, either balancing or through other means. The third PLA position is that India wants to control the Indian Ocean region, through which, of course, there is a lot of oil that China receives from West Asia, from Africa, and others. So 80% of these, of nearly 380 million tons passing through Indian Ocean. So the policy option the PLA suggests is in the garb of counter-piracy operations across Somalia. How do they become an actor in the Indian Ocean? So Hambantota, the Gwadar, Karachi, Chittagong, or in Myanmar, some of the facilities that they are constructing, including Great Coco or Djibouti, or Ihavan in Maldives before, are all as a policy option for that. So PLA has these positions, and the policies are reflected. Then there are also the chambers of commerce. Shanghai Chamber of Commerce is also an influential player in the decision-making process, because they are earning a lot of money for the Chinese, and some $4 trillion exports and imports. And then, of course, the investments and others. At one time, they used to receive some $300 billion a month. That's nearly half of Indian forex reserves by these exports and other profits. So this is a Chamber of Commerce is a huge actor, and they influence. Once Poshi Lai was a commerce minister, and so there is the commercial interest that India has and China has, and they look at India mainly as a consumer base. Since we consume 59% of our 59% of the GDP of the things that we textiles, automobiles, or whatever consumer durables. So Chambers of Commerce in China looks at the Indian view as a consumer base. And this is where India had now restricted after Galwan the apps, 200 odd apps, or the investment in infrastructure projects or on other aspects. So this is where the policy option is to put pressure on India to join the RCEP. Previously, they suggested a free trade area, which we rejected. There is a joint working group on economic affairs. It's going slow on these issues. So the Chambers of Commerce is looking at lucrative trade and investment options. Then there are other groups like the civil society groups, which are not very prominent in their positions on India. As Ambassador Bambawale mentioned about Buddhism, the other aspects. So overall then, I would say that the perceptions are relatively realistic from IR realism perspective in nature, and their policies are also more of a balancing nature in terms of balance of power. So that is the broader feature that we get across in the decision making and how they have the think tanks, the academia. Many of them are also party members. Almost all of them are party members. So they do have party perspective, put across in their assessments. Think tanks like Kikir is prominent, and here you see various scholars like you see the influence of various scholars here. So let me briefly mention some of these scholars. The previous scholars, Ye Chengqia, Kang Yin-cheng, Lin Chengqie, Huang Xinchun, Cheng Ruisheng, Cheng Ruixiang, or other the scholars who have either passed away or pretty old today, they did follow some of the balance of power approach, but they also had Cheng Ruisheng, Ambassador Cheng Ruisheng, for instance, would also accommodate India's national interest to an extent. And so there is also the accommodative nature, but this is part of that multipolarity, multilateralism that we just mentioned. Then there is a set of scholars like Hu Shusheng, Fu Xiaoqiang, Fang Qining, Lao Chunhua, Lan Qianshui, Pang Chenqiang, Zhao Kancheng, Tu Youkang, or others who follow the realist traditions. Then there are also, of course, constructivists like Qi Xianlin, who received one of the highest awards from India for his work on Sanskrit. There is also the former Shanghai Institute of International Studies president who had this constructivist angle. So there are various spectrums across the IR theory from this, but realism dominates the Chinese scholars' perspective as well. So let me stop here and broadly suggest that these are the perceptions and the policies that they propose.
Thank you very much, sir, for bringing in that comprehensive approach based on both stakeholders as well as linking into the larger IR discourse. Now we will open the floor for Q&A. Those attending online, kindly raise your hand or put it in the chat box. Kindly introduce yourself as you raise the question.
Hi, my name is Daksh Sharma. My name is Daksh Sharma. I'm a second year student here in the department. My first question is to Lieutenant General Narasimhan. Sir, during all these operations, have you seen any evolution of the Chinese military strategy over the years when it comes to all these incursions? Have they employed different tactics, or has there been any general change in the Chinese military strategy? And my second question is both to the Ambassador and the Lieutenant General again, that we haven't talked about how does China perceives India's nuclear program, and what effect does the nuclear program of India and the nuclear weapons capability of India have on China? Because we've talked about the science and technology and other things, but what does the nuclear component add to this conversation?
Should I answer this question or should I wait for other questions to come in?
So you can answer, you can go one on one.
Fine. Different tactics, basically, yes, I would say there have been different tactics. Initially, it was just about how to push a little bit here and there on the line of actual control. But the kind of tactics that they actually adopted during the last year, during summer, using sort of, I would say, not the conventional kind of weaponry, but I would say unconventional weaponry, which is used generally for riot control and things like that. It's the different tactics altogether. So the tactics is evolving. China's tactics has always been something like a flow of water. The moment you put some obstruction in front, it will find an easy path to move around it or move away from this. So this is something like a flow of water. The different tactics have been seen, and you will see, like for example, certain SOPs which were evolved over 2012, 13, etc., was to overcome the problem that we are facing during the patrolling aspect. Like for example, when they come for a patrol and you stop them, they start then moving along the line of actual control. To stop them from coming into our area, we have to follow them. So therefore, different tactics were seen, and we adapt to those different tactics to meet and counter those tactics. That is one question. The second question along the nuclear program. Their reaction to our nuclear program is very visible, particularly when Mr. George Fernandez in 1998 mentioned China as the #1 enemy of India in his letter, and which was actually it was very vehemently protested by the Chinese at that time. Their effort to assist Pakistan in its nuclear program is a direct correlation to what our nuclear program has been. That is #1. #2, their resistance to give us the nuclear suppliers group waiver in 2008 till the last moment, and also their resistance for us to get the membership of the nuclear suppliers group is all indicative of the Chinese reaction to India's nuclear program. But both the countries have got a no first use of nuclear doctrine, and that is something that is common to both. Though there have been doubts about this no first use policy, but generally that has been the line of direction as far as nuclear policy of both the countries are concerned. But the Chinese reaction to India's nuclear program is what I explained to you in my answer.
Ambassador, sir, now we have to discuss.
No, I think General Narasimhan has said it very loudly and clearly. I don't think I should add anything more to what he has said. Thank you, Amrita.
May I request after the question, please?
Good morning, sir. It was a really wonderful lecture. I got to know a lot of things. So, we don't know perceptions here. We mostly get to hear the perceptions of the elite and those who are in power in China. So, to any of the panel members can answer. So, I'd like to know how the common people of China perceive India currently, like with all the narrative that's going on from different media outlets and from the statements of the Chinese administration as well. So, how do the common people perceive India? And secondly, it is very visible that China sees a lot of opposition against India. They call us a hegemon and use very negative terms, whether it is in the media or with the kind of statements they give out. The narrative is very strong and it is very negative also. So, My question is, how long will India take to call out on China and take a more stronger stance against China, because they clearly see us as an adversary while we our leadership, or even from the Minister of External Affairs, statements are very light when compared to what kind of statements are used by China. So how long will we take be a little more aggressive, not like very strong against China, like the way China is? Thank you.
May I request Ambassador Bambawale, Professor Srikanth Kondapalli, and then Lieutenant General Narasimhan to respond to the question.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Amrita. Thank you for that question. Let me just quickly lay out my understandings and my views on the very interesting questions which have been asked by the young man. Let me start with the last bit first of, the question about when will India call out China, take stronger positions, react in stronger words, in stronger language. So I think over there, what we do factor in, what the government does factor in, is the fact that there is a great asymmetry in power between China and India. That is a fact which is not going away soon. And very easily, and the way to measure this asymmetry in power is through the size of the GDP, where China is roughly $15 trillion, we are roughly $3 trillion. So there's a 5:1 gap between our two countries. So I think that is one thing which we need to factor in. The second thing is that, what is more important, young man, is actions rather than words. And we should judge China by her actions rather than her words. And similarly, China should judge us by our actions rather than our words. And I think India's actions speak much louder than any words we could use, because the speed at which the Quad has moved, for example, over the last few years, the speed at which the Indian Army reacted to Chinese, attempts at changing the ground situation, on changing the, the situation on the ground in Eastern Ladakh is concerned. I think they will, the Chinese will study those actions, and those actions speak much louder than any words that we can use. So I think that's my answer to your second more interesting question. The first question about how do the common people perceive China, perceive India? See, that's a good question, but the problem is that the common people don't have a say in decision making. They don't have a say in policy setting. So therefore, whether it is me or whether it is General Narasimhan or whether it's Professor Kondapalli, we spoke about how the power structure within China views India, and how the common man in China views India does not really have an impact on their policies. But to answer your question, how does the common man perceive India? I had given the example of Indian software. I had given the example of Indian space technology, where Western countries launch their satellites on Indian space launch vehicles, but not on Chinese space launch vehicles, etc., etc. In the recent past, Amir Khan, our actor, was very, very popular in China because his movies did very well, particularly movies like, The Singing Superstar and Three Idiots, etc. did very, very well. Dang did very, very well in China because young people in China thought that, the themes of these movies were something that they can identify with. So in Dangal, for example, young ladies, young women in China could identify with some of the themes which were explored in Dangal, and so too with Singing Superstar. So let me stop there and hand over to the other panelists, because I'm sure they'll have their own viewpoints also. Thank you.
Srikanth, you want to go first or should I go?
Please go ahead.
Okay. 3-4 points I want to say on the first point of common people in China, how they view India. If you travel to China about 20 years ago, I'm sure I met Professor Srikanth for the first time there in Beijing. Their mind was still on Raj Kapoor. You met a common man, he'll first, the moment you say you're an Indian, the first thing he'll do is he'll start singing that "Main Awara Hoon." So that's what was the feeling towards Indians around that time. It would have changed a little bit with the demographic changes, plus also the generational changes that have taken place. But the issue that comes up is they do have certain amount of appreciation for India. Not all common man is against India. For example, one of the incidents which actually stuck to my mind was when I was traveling in a taxi in Beijing, and the driver asked me, "Where are you from?" I told him I am from India, and the first thing that he mentioned was that you guys have got an aircraft carrier. So the kind of certain things which India had done and India had at that power at that time also was appreciated by the Chinese. Not only the aircraft carrier, Mr. Bambawale talked about the internet capability, the internet capability, software capability, and also the space. A lot of writings around Mangalyaan when we launched that Mars mission was said that India was successful in launching this mission at 1/10 of the cost of anybody else. So there was a certain amount of appreciation which is also there. The common man on the road, I don't think has got a strong enmity towards India or the Indian people, basically because the familial ties that we have here are similar to the familiar ties that they have in China. This is as far as the first question is concerned. The second question on the why we are not so strong in our narratives or in the way we express our views is basically because of two things. In addition to what Ambassador Bambawale said, he very clearly covered. One is we want, as far as China is concerned, the moment you take it out into the public domain, it expands that particular domain, and then it creates further problems for us. Second thing is we need to prioritize our issues. What is our issue today with China? We have our own bilateral issues. That is what is more important than to show China in a poor light in a public domain. That is not what we intend to do. What we are intending to do is to work harder towards resolving the issues bilaterally with China. Thank you.
I would like to request Devansh to put forward this question.
Thank you, esteemed panelist, for your time and for this wonderful lecture.
Mr. Kondapalli, would you like to respond?
Sure. After this question, I will take up all those.
Okay, sure. So Devansh, you can go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for this lecture. So my question is to Ambassador Bambawale. So you started off by saying that how India civilization or the civilizational aspect is concerned. We see in today's time US. Sorry, ma'am. You were saying something? Okay.
There was a bit of a drop, so if you can just repeat the question, please.
Yes. Am I audible now?
Yes, absolutely. Loud and
okay. So my question was that we see that as you started off by saying that India and China are diametrically opposite as far as our civilizational aspects are concerned. So in today's time also, we see countries like US using their soft power and telling how they are, the savior of the world. They are the global saviors and all that. And back in our time when India was a superpower, or at least civilizationally when we were great, we had this concept of Vasudeva Kutumbakam, where we were also doing the same thing, but in a very different way and a very subtle way. But this thing is something we don't see China disseminating certain messages. So is it just only because of the political ideologies to which they are inclined in today's time, or is it more of a civilizational defect, if we can say? So is it because is it in their civilizational concepts or basis, or is it just because of this political ideology? So that's my question, sir.
Yeah, let me quickly answer that question, Srikanth, and then I hand the floor over to you for answering all the previous questions and possibly this one also. The way I look at it is that, yes, you may be right that the US, tom-toms its soft power, etc., from the rooftops. While China may not be doing exactly the same thing, the Chinese are not very shy about talking about their own assistance and help to other countries. And what they actually do, of course, is very, very important. So if you look at countries across the globe, but particularly if you look at India's neighborhood, you will see that the Chinese are providing economic assistance and so many other things to all our neighbors, whether it's Pakistan or whether it's Bangladesh. Or even Maldives, Sri Lanka, etc. So I don't think the Chinese are exactly shy in tom-tomming their achievements, but they may not be doing it in the same way as the Americans do it. Having said that, I believe that India should continue doing what it is doing with its own neighbors. And there are certain aspects where the Chinese just cannot replace us. And I'll give you just one example. A lot of people talk about the China-Nepal relationship, but there are so many strengths of the India-Nepal relationship which no one even mentions, which are taken for granted. And I agree with you that we need to tom-tom that. One example is, do you find a lot of Nepalese working in China? Answer is no. Do you find a lot of Nepalese working in India? Answer is yes. Is the border between India and Nepal open? Answer is yes. Is the border between China and Nepal open? The answer is no. So there are so many, there are so many areas in which India has a competitive advantage, which are not even mentioned by many analysts and observers and writers and authors, which I hope will come into play. And we have to continue doing what we do. We do not have the deep pockets or the kind of endless supply of assistance and aid that the Chinese have. But I think we will give them a good run for their money in this long-term game between India and China. And I want to just take up that theme for just half a minute. That look, everything that the three of us have said and all the questions that you have asked, all of which was very relevant. Don't forget that this is a long-term game between India and China, and who the ultimate winner is, we may not be around to see, but hopefully our grandchildren or their grandchildren will be around to see. I'll stop there and hand over to Professor Kondapalli.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Bambawale. I will go back to some of the questions that were raised. So what changed in China's military strategy? The first issue that was raised. Previously, they were mentioning about people's war strategy and people's war under modern conditions later in 50s and 80s. Now, what changed was the local war under high-tech and then informationized warfare. So that is one change. The last one, the local war under informationized conditions, is a direct lesson learned from the Gulf Wars in 91 and 2003. And let me bring India here. The military region commander of Chengdu, he initiated the discussion related to local war under high-tech conditions in the early 1990s. And he suggested 4 conditions why China would wage a war against any adversary. So the first 2 conditions he mentioned was the unresolved territorial disputes or sovereignty disputes. So we actually figure out in that because our territorial dispute is still hanging and we have not resolved the problem with China or the other way around. So this is the 2 conditions. He also mentioned, of course, the oceanic interests and others, but for us, the relevant portion is the territorial dispute. So China is willing to fight a local war under high-tech or informationized conditions based on these unresolved territorial disputes. So the strategy has changed. military strategy has changed from that point of view. Tactics are always evolving for specific conditions. As General Narasimhan mentioned, specific conditions, specific tactics are used. Operational principles are evolving. For counterterrorism, within counterterrorism, you have so many, based on scenarios, they evolve these tactics. So that is one change that happened. That is local war under informationized conditions. We saw the drones, for example, in Galwan, the unmanned aerial vehicles or other RMA related, revolution in military affairs related equipment being displayed by the Chinese. So that is one, the legacy of 1991 Gulf War. No contact war is one legacy of the Gulf War. So that is one major change that has happened in the China's military strategy. Tactics keep changing and specific to the specific circumstances. Second is the nuclear program so as the two speakers have mentioned, there is the nuclear tests India conducted, and of course we now become a strategic parity with China because we have both the minimum nuclear deterrence positions, although China has been changing towards limited nuclear deterrence in terms of stockpile, in terms of their operational principles or others. But what is clear is that while China opposed this in the 1172 resolution in 1998, they mentioned that about for the nuclear program. So when you look at the Agni 5 launch a few days ago, even before the launch, the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson invoked the 1172 resolution. But 1172 resolution, even if you accept that as sacrosanct, it speaks about the nuclear program rather than the ballistic missile program. And India is a member of the MTCR, Missile Technology Control Regime, while China is not a member of the MTCR. Yet the Foreign Ministry spokesperson mentioned about the 1172 resolution and the other issues related, which are of no relevance for this Agni 5 test and others. So on the nuclear program, there is this nuance that we need to notice. Although we have seen recently that they have nearly 200 sites located in Qinghai or other places for the ballistic missile locations. So that is, we need to factor the capability that China is increasing in the ballistic missile areas. The third is on the common people's views on China. As was mentioned, the common people's perceptions do not creep into the policy, rarely actually. But there are obviously Chinese common perceptions. These may not have come into the policy related. So let us dissect the Chinese society. So about 50-55% believe in Confucianism, about 18% believe in Buddhism. Confucianism is indigenous to China, so no major views on India regarding that. But Buddhism went from India, Nepal, Terai to Tibet, from Tibet to China, China to East Asia, other societies. So there is a certain soft aspect for the common perceptions in terms of Buddhism, because if you take a Lonely Planet guide and travel in China, you invariably land in a Buddhist monastery, because Buddhist monasteries are the icons. Although Buddha said Buddha was an idolatry, he criticized the statues, but the first statues came of the Buddha, including in Bamiyan and other places. So Chinese monasteries, Buddhist monasteries, although controlled by the Communist Party, they call National Patriotic Religious Association in this. Having said that, we see that 80% of Chinese who come to India are Buddhists. So they go to Bodh Gaya, Sarnath, or other Sanchi or other places of Buddhist tourist importance. So from perceptions point of view, this does influence. because we also see that the priority for the Dalai Lama is to address the Chinese Buddhists. One Tibetan complained to me that we commanded the third priority for the Dalai Lama. The first priority is the Chinese Buddhists. Second priority is other foreigners. The third is for Indians, and fourth is for the Tibetans, because the Tibetans in any case believe he is the God. So there is less priority. A Tibetan complained to me of the importance that the Dalai Lama gives. He also probably wants to approach the Chinese and convey the message. So quite legitimate, quite possible. But this is an important thing, because in these conversations, they also find the common Chinese complaining about the problems that China has in these conversations. So that is one way we can gauge the common perceptions, common people's perceptions. But those of you who are doing research on this aspect at MAHE would see the People's Daily or Horizon group. In China, there is a group which conducts the public opinion polls. They sometimes have these public opinions, but rarely they conducted on India. So there is an issue here, but you can still find out in the public opinion polls. Most of these are orchestrated, so you still have a problem in the public opinion polls. Nevertheless, this is one other aspect that you can find. Finally, on civilizational aspect, India is a continuous civilization, while China had a disruption from 49 to roughly when Jiang Zemin mentioned about 3 represents in 2002-2003. Because in these 3 represents, Jiang Zemin, who ruled over China from 89 to 2002, he said that Communist Party represents broad masses, advanced productive forces, but also said advanced culture. So here Neo-Confucianism came in, that is the civilizational link, for the first time in the Communist Party official jargon. So since then, they started glorifying the Neo-Confucianism. So that is, in other words, civilization became the main theme in China since roughly about 2000s. So we can say, because as you know, during Cultural Revolution, all 4 olds have been abolished. Old ideas, old traditions, old culture, old religion, so on, which are part of that civilizations. So there is a disjuncture in the civilizational discourse of China, although it is now resurrected after a gap of nearly 40-50 years between 49 to roughly 2000. So we can say that there is a disruption in China, while there is no disruption in India. If you look at the clothing patterns or others in India, culture and others. But to take it to the IR related, where MAHE may be more interested, there is, as you know, civilizational conflict. Samuel Huntington mentioned this. The Chinese are not so worried at that time, but after Kiron Skinner, the former Assistant Secretary of State in the US State Department, she mentioned that Chinese are not Caucasian enough. So there began the clash of civilizations with China. That is where in the last 2-3 years, China started further mentioning about their civilizational legacy. And so this is a conflict that is going to emerge between US and China. You may recall that Iran began the civilizational dialogue in the UN, and other countries have also joined. So China quickly picked up this thread and started floating the Asian civilizations dialogue. This is only last 3 years. So they forgot about civilization before, and now suddenly taking up this and trying a united front with other countries. So there is a larger conflict that is emerging on the civilizational. Some of you could pick up this as your thesis topic. Interesting to find about this. So those are some interventions that I have.
Thank you very much, sir. As we are running a bit late, so we'll take the last set of questions, a set of 4 questions in a collective approach. I'll read out one of the questions and then 3 will be extended by a few of our masters, second year students. First question is by Trisha Roach, says that, and mentions to Professor Srikanth Kondapalli. I would like to know how China-Bangladesh relations affects or challenges India's security, so specifically on that regional context. And does this growing relation change Bangladesh standpoint on PRI project? And now I would like to invite the MA scholars to listen.
Hello, sir. Speakers, I am Sisuraj, second year master's student. It was a great lecture. I got to know so many things. I have 2 questions. First one is for Lieutenant General Narasimhan, and the question is like how China perceives India's ballistic missile program. That you have answered it like tangentially, one of the speakers, but I want to know about the entire ballistic missile program. Right from that, we have chosen the integrated ballistic missile development program from that time. And my second question is, what should be the ideal force structure of Indian Army to deter Chinese aggression at LAC? Like looking specifically in isolation with other factors that has already been explained, just the force structure to deter the aggression. Thank you, sir.
Good morning. My question is to yes, Ambassador Bambawale. Geographically, India is in a very hostile neighborhood, which has been curbing India to secure its interests away from its home region, and it has been forced to look inwards. This is not the same with China. Despite China being in a hostile neighborhood, it has managed to secure its interests both economic and security related worldwide. But my question is, how will China survive in the longer run without having any alliances or friends? Thank you.
Good morning and my greetings to the esteemed panel. I'm Gargi, a second year student at the department. So according to Chanakya, to defeat one's enemy, one needs to know not only their strength, but also their weaknesses. So my question to Professor Kondapalli is, what are those often missed out but crucial Chinese weaknesses or loopholes that you noticed that India can use it to its own advantage strategically? Thank you.
Okay. Good morning. I'm Mohaimeen, a first-year master's student at the department, and my question is addressed to Lieutenant General Narasimhan. Are the border skirmishes just the way to divert India from building its navy and improving its capacity against China's rising power in the Indo-Pacific region? Thank you.
Thank you, students. I'd like to proceed with Ambassador Bambawale. Then followed by General Narasimhan and then Professor Kondapalli. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Professor Jayesh, for that, because I was about to say that I need to leave in a couple of minutes. But an excellent set of questions. I'm going to leave the bulk of them to General Narasimhan and Professor Kondapalli. But there was one question which was very interesting about how China itself lives in a hostile neighborhood and how will it survive in the longer run without friends. And of course, the questioner also started by focusing attention that India needs to look inward and improve its economic situation and improve its economic strength. So I completely agree with that, the way forward for India is to look inward, to ensure that its economy continues to grow by 7, 8, 9, 10% GDP growth per annum. We need to focus on that. We need to have a long-term enhancement of our economic strength. And along with that economic strength will also come military strength, will also come technological prowess, will also come educational strength, etc., which we have seen in many countries across the globe. They all get enhanced together. As far as China is concerned, I'd like to say that, you are absolutely right. You have actually hit the nail on the head, that even as the second largest economy in the world, China has followed policies which have put off a number of countries across the globe, whether it is stemming from COVID-19, whether it is their policy of their diplomatic practices of wolf warrior diplomacy in the recent past. The Chinese have successfully been able to turn off a number of countries which earlier were not so sure about what China was about to do and what China's progress would be like. And Australia, Japan, India are just some examples in those which has led to the strengthening of the Quad. So if this is how China is going to react as it grows stronger, I think the writing is on the wall. And I think many countries, including India, need to make the choice that it is better to have a hegemon who is 5,000 miles away from us in the United States, rather than a hegemon of the world who is on your borders. This is the choice that we need to make, and I think in the short run, India needs to strengthen its ties with the United States, with the Quad, and with similar thinking countries, including France, Germany, the UK. I think that's the way we need to go in the short run, and I do hope that the government of India will do that. And this does not in any way reduce India's strategic independence or India's strategic autonomy, because it protects our strategic autonomy from military coercion that China is attempting on our borders. I'm going to stop there, and thank you so very much.
So just a moment before we start, I think so Master Kamal has already left. Okay, so now we start with General Narasimhan. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, I couldn't get two of the questions clearly. If you could get them repeated, I'll be grateful. The first question on Bangladesh, something was on Bangladesh, and the last question on the media part of it.
Who asked on the media part of it? Oh, no, it was you. My me.
Sorry, sir. My question was, are the border skirmishes just a way to divert India from building its navy and improving its capacity against the China's rising sea power in the Indo-Pacific?
Got that. Thank you. And the first question, which is on Bangladesh.
This question was on Bangladesh, that how China-Bangladesh relations affect or challenge Indian security, and also on the perspective from the BRI project. How does that impact China's own relations with Bangladesh?
Which project is that?
What's that?
Which project?
BRI.
BRI. Okay, let me take on these questions one by one. Firstly, on this China-Bangladesh relations, we have just completed a study on that China-Bangladesh relations. They are actually not, I would say they're improving, but they're not to the extent that it will cause any concern to us. The reason I'm saying this is, even though $26 billion was announced as a BRI assistance for Bangladesh, hardly any money has come into that country. Bangladesh has actually been very, very careful in accepting the One Belt One Road initiative projects and the kind of loans and grants that are associated with it. Second thing is, if you look at the China-Bangladesh economic relationship, there you have that there is a huge trade deficit with China. That is number one. Number two, the grants are very less, but the loans are higher. So if you look at the same thing with India, India fares far, far better with Bangladesh. The other thing about the China-Bangladesh military assistance, that has been going on for some time, including purchase of 2 submarines and the building of a submarine base in Bangladesh. So these things are on. Those things are being monitored. Their political relations are actually in a bit of a limbo, basically because they initially supported Khalida Zia earlier when she was there. Later on, they tried to make amends, but that somehow is not actually working out really too well. But their efforts are on to improve that relationship. So as an overall thing, I would not place the China-Bangladesh relations as at a level which is of great concern to us at this point in time. To ensure that India-Bangladesh relations have also been given the due attention that needs to be given. So that is what about Bangladesh. On the integrated missile development program, the Chinese feel that India is far behind the China's missile capability, which I would agree to some extent, basically because if you look at the missile arsenal of China, they have a missile for every range, starting from the short range ballistic missiles of 200-300 kilometers till about DF-41 variety, which is 14,000 kilometers range. So they have a missile for every range that can be thought of. And second thing is they also been gone ahead in the hypersonic glide vehicle capability. So put all this together, we are far behind the Chinese as far as missile development program is concerned, but the progress is also quite good in the sense that you must have seen recently, last couple of days, you found an Agni 5 missile being tested, and which has the capability to cover the whole of China. So, but that is only one aspect of it. We are also doing our research and development on hypersonic glide vehicles. So we are also on the path of catching up, but the Chinese missile capability is better than ours at this point in time. As far as the force structure is concerned, I don't want to go into the numbers, but I'll leave this thought with you and the point with you. Many of us think that, we think in terms of numbers. They've got so many tanks, they have so many aircraft, they have so many ships, and so India has got this many, and so there is a mismatch. So what you all need to think about is how much of that capability can it bring to bear against us? That is the point that we need to be worried about and we need to be careful about. And while doing that, if we are trying to catch up platform to platform, weapon platform to weapon platform with China, then that is going to be a no-go, because the kind of money and the resources that you will that you will need, it will far outweigh your capability to spend. So therefore, you need to look at creating deterrence, and to deterrence capability, you don't have to spend that much money. So you need to structure it in a manner that China should think twice before launching anything against you, but you don't have to really catch up platform to platform with China. The other thing that the weaknesses point, I'll leave it to Dr. Kondapalli, Navy sea power. Please understand, even with all that capability that China has got at this point in time, they are not capable of sustained operations in Indian Ocean region. And the border incident that we had last year in no way affects India's building of the sea power. So that is something I wanted to clarify at the outset. The reason why I'm saying this is all these capabilities are not thought about event-wise or incident-wise. These are all long-term plans which have been worked on. The way the development of the Navy will take place, particularly services. They need aircraft, they need ships. So they are all not going to happen overnight. So these plans are made on a long term. So therefore, I don't think the incidents of Ladakh or incidents that happen in the land border will anyway affect the sea power building capability of India. But at the moment, Chinese are also not capable of operating for a longer period of time in the Indian Ocean region with the capability that they have now. Maybe 10 years down the line, we may find more ships from the PLA Navy in the Indian Ocean region. These days, we find anything up to 8 to 11 ships in the Indian Ocean region at any point in time. Those are being tracked and taken care of. Thank you.
So, I would request Srikanth sir to respond to the questions.
Can I reply on the question on weaknesses of China?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. There are a number of weaknesses that India can look at carefully and evolve its policies. One is the globalization itself, in which China today, in the Davos meeting, Xi Jinping mentioned about the leadership that China can have in the globalization. So this is one where India needs to work in WTO or other areas in order to go for the equitable distribution. So RCEP, CPTPP, or other issues are areas where India can actually work out with other countries. It is doing currently with Japan, with Australia now, with the 2+2 dialogue and others. There is the SEPA agreement with Australia that India is thinking about, and also with the European Union and the United States. So there is a certain measure here because of the Chinese position on globalization and other trade dependence. Number one. Number two, as a part of this economic aspect, China's mergers and acquisitions relatively are lower as compared with Indian companies' mergers and acquisitions abroad. And this is partly because of the push that China has in the Belt and Road Initiative or others, and the debt-related aspects. So this is an area where India has some edge, and as it joins the meeting in Glasgow on Build Back Better World or other North-South transport corridor or others, this is an area India needs to look at carefully, both in mergers and acquisitions as well as in terms of investments. The third area is the stress on resources. China is a net importer of many of the resources, including iron, coal, copper, you name it, they are heavily dependent on this. So this is an area of area that India needs to look at, because India's exports 60% of that is iron ore to China. And in the light of China-Australia differences after the WHO meeting last year on the virus originating from Wuhan, that issue, there is a lot of trade conflict between Australia and China. So this is where India needs to look at on the resources. And one of the resources here is energy security. 80% of this is passing through the Indian Ocean. So Indian Navy has a substantial role here. If something happens in Galwan or in Arunachal Pradesh or other areas, we have so far not been able to use the Navy, Indian Navy, but we were able to only use the Army and Air Force as of now to address the issue. But that issue is a broad issue of conflict with China, and the Navy has not been utilized extensively. So there is some area there that we can maneuver on the maritime zones. The other area is that the Chinese domestic situation is becoming more complex, with the Gini coefficient increasing substantially, 0.61 as compared to 0.34 in India. So there is a lot of turbulence within China. And to address this, they recently promoted the common prosperity angle. But still, the political stability issues in China are problematic with the demonstrations and others. Since China wanted to promote its China model as part of the 19-party Congress resolution, this is one area where India should promote its model of development. We have seen, as compared to Washington consensus and Beijing consensus, we have Mumbai consensus, but Mumbai consensus has not been popularized yet. If I take a call on the hall here, I'm not sure how many of you know about Mumbai consensus, but that is a thing that we need to promote as a part of that, because China is facing flag domestically. If you see all those restrictions on fintechs, edtechs, car hailing apps and others, we see there is a lot of instability within China, both at economic and political level. The other area is ethnic aspects. Tibet, for instance, Xinjiang or others. There is, while China wants to reunify with Taiwan, Hong Kong, Macau, and they also say Southern Tibet, there is the aspiration of Mongolians for unification that has been stalled. So there is also a prospect here. Ethnic, we do have the 15th Dalai Lama transition issue, and the US had passed the TPSA, Tibet Policy Support Act. We have not said much about this, although the Dalai Lama lives in India. So this is an area what, of course, the Prime Minister had sent a birthday greetings for the first time to the Dalai Lama recently. So this is an area where one can bank on the ethnic. If you look at the map of China, 2/3 of China's 9.9 million square kilometers is by the ethnic minorities. So there is a huge prospect here on for India on the ethnic. So it needs to articulate further. Then there is also the weaknesses China has on aging society, environment, the limited renminbi conversion or others. So this is also where we need to work on in order to gain something out of these in the limitations of China's rise. So let me stop here. Thank you for those questions.
Thank you very much, sir. As we come to the penultimate stage of our discussion for today, I would like to start by thanking each of our panelists for sparing their valuable time on a Saturday. And it's very encouraging for our students. And here I would like to call myself a student, because that to have your professors and mentors to come in and deliver lecture, it just gives us more encouragement to take this dialogue forward, and also create more awareness among the youth on the China studies, specifically in these trying times. So I would like to thank each one of you all. And as we conclude from each of the deliberations that we see, firstly, there was no overlaps, and there were some new insights that were brought to the table, right from Ambassador Bambawale talking on the philosophical ideas and how do you see the differences at the macro level and how that percolates to the bilaterals. Then with Professor Srikanth Kondapalli looking at the stakeholder debate, which is a rare thing to even see, that bringing in the domestic politics and then linking into the larger higher discourse. And finally, General Narasimhan, who takes you into a total understanding of things through the visualization. These maps are very important, and that becomes the impressions in your mind until 2020 and say 2021. And here that brings out a comprehensive, a holistic approach of understanding the changing dynamics in India-China relations based on the very crucial aspect of how China perceives India, which is often the missing point. On that note, I would like to now invite Mohammed, our first year student, to give the vote of thanks. And I would conclude by saying a big thank you to each one and all, both the speakers and the participants for today.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is my privilege to have been asked to propose a vote of thanks for this webinar on the topic India and China's Eyes, Perception and Policies. I, on behalf of the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations, express my sincere gratitude to the panelists, Ambassador Gautam Bambawale, Professor Srikanth Kondapalli, and Lieutenant General SL Narasimhan. We thank you for taking out time of your busy schedule and for sharing your valuable expertise and experience on this relevant topic that has gained momentum in the recent times. It has enlightened us and given us insight into China's foreign policy and attitude towards India. It was especially insightful to learn about the timeline of the conflict, the historical and philosophical perspective of China about the decision-making bodies and military establishments. I would also like to thank Dr. Amrita Jash, Assistant Professor, for being our moderator today. And I would further like to extend my thanks to Dr. Nanda Kishore, the Head of Department, and Dr. Anand, Assistant Professor. I would also like to thank Purnima, PhD Scholar at the department, for designing the poster. Finally, I would like to thank the audience, both online and offline, for their active participation and cooperation. I once again like to thank everyone involved in making the webinar a success. And we further look forward to have more such enriching sessions with their esteemed panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mohammed, and thank you so much, General Narasimhan and Srikanth, and of course, Ambassador Bambawale, and wish you all a very happy weekend, and thank you again for your precious time. Thank you, sir. Look forward to greater association.